All right, this is going to be part 2 of my response to some comments left on my response video to John the Other. And before I get into the Nazi punching proponent here, I do want to read one other comment that was left by another YouTuber whose username I'm not going to try to read. It's a bunch of characters. Maybe it's supposed to mean something and I'm missing it, but I would actually encourage you to go read it. It's in its entirety. It's too long for me to read all of it here, but it's very good. And it's on my part 2 response video. The loudest and most publicly active portions of the political left, namely progressivism, have become a utopianist cult that has advanced to its either-or stage. Either you're them, and thus good, or you're not them, and by that, evil. At that stage, ideological others, whether directly or otherwise, begin to be given the ultimatum: convert, or silently submit, or be terrorized. The reality is that the tail end of the option is only or be terrorized because they don't yet have the societal power to make it or be killed. We all know damn well that if they had the state's power behind their ideology, people would be fined, imprisoned, and eventually executed. And I think there's some potential truth to that statement. We've seen in some recent rallies where they were asking some people about Trump, and they said, oh, I would kill him for the people. I'm not sure which people, right, of course. There's a denial here, of course, of the other portion of the voting public, and as I've said in videos previous, that's the bargain of democracy. You have to be prepared to not win, and if you don't win, just throwing the chessboard all over the room and storming out is not the most mature way to handle things. If you disagree with someone politically and you live in a democracy and you were willing to accept victory, you have to be willing to accept defeat. I mean, that's just the bargain of it. And as many of you know, I actually disagree with democracy. I think it's immoral. We could get into that another time. But if you are going to accept the bargain of democracy, you have to accept that potential outcome. And we all know what would be being said were the vote to go the other way, and people were crying. Republicans or conservatives were crying over the fact that they lost the election, and they didn't like the policies. People would say, "Well, you better vote better next time. Get your support next time." Right? They wouldn't have any sympathy for the fact that people had lost the election. But these people were being asked, about Trump specifically, and some of them said, I'd kill him for the people. Others said, if there were enough people, we'd just get together as a group and we'd do him Gaddafi style. And if you know anything about how Gaddafi died, it's not pretty. And I've got a bit of an issue with this glee over the way certain even monstrous dictators are killed, because to me, when it comes to that point in time where you do what you got to do, it ought to be a somber moment, I think, of reflection. I watched as a bunch of people really, really cheered and celebrated when Saddam Hussein was killed, and I take that as a more somber moment. Saddam Hussein, as a baby, was not born to be any kind of a brutal dictator or a bad actor, a murderer, whatever he was. And of course, I only know what Saddam Hussein was because of what I've been told. I don't know any of it firsthand. So I believe most of it, but very, very, with like one eye squinting. I'm critical of it. I don't believe everything that I'm told. I'm willing to accept that he was a bad actor. But there's too many political incentives for people to make up stories and to demonize, somebody who was once their buddy, right? There's plenty of pictures of former defense secretaries shaking hands. He's once a proud ally or whatever. But I'm willing to accept that he was a bad actor. But to me, if you get to the point where you've got to kill a Gaddafi or a Saddam Hussein or whoever, it ought to be a somber moment of reflection that this is duty calls, and we've got to do what we have to do here because of the crimes of this person, but with a recognition that were this person born into a different situation, they probably would not have become that person. This is a failure of humanity on a large scale that we create monsters like this. I just don't believe that infants are born with that ultimate destiny regardless of their surroundings. So to sensationalize a death of someone like Gaddafi and then put that, of course, on a sitting president, you know, that's pretty heinous. And I think it does speak a little bit towards what this commenter was talking about, that this would be expanded to other people, and of course they've already done it. They've expanded, you know, their violence to police officers and to journalists and things like that. So they're already expanding their violence. So there's no reason to think that this wouldn't, you know, expand beyond these limits. But I did want to get to this other comment. This will take up the rest of this video by this JI person, I think it is. So I asked this person to elaborate, and they said, who is the instigators of violence? Is it the right that wants a right to act threatening against anyone not Snow White? Who is the right here, first of all? And acting threatening. I mean, these are very vague terms, right? The right? Are you talking about who? You know, who is the right? Are you talking about any person with conservative ideas? Are you talking about Steven Crowder? Are you talking about Donald Trump? Are you talking about Newt Gingrich? Or are you talking about white nationalists? Are you talking about white supremacists? And I'm talking about utilizing these terms a little bit more accurately, right? And you know, you really need to appropriate these terms correctly for them to mean anything. Somebody challenged my use of the word fascism in a comment, which seems to have gone. I can't find it now. And they said, you know, I need to do more research. Well, that's a good point. In a way, fascism has been used by many people to mean certain things, because fascism, if you look at the actual political ideology that's been declared to be fascism, it has many aspects to it, right? There's the authoritarian part of it, there's the oppression of dissidents part of it, there's the nationalistic aspect of it, there's many different aspects to it, and so we always use these terms so fluidly. I think the important thing is that a person, you know, that's why in a debate you define your terms, right? The important part is not the term, it's the definition. And people are using terms as a conclusion, and these terms become, they become emotional. These terms become completely devoid of definition. I think I heard somewhere once that George Orwell said, you know, the term fascism is meaningless. And in that sense, he's right. He said, you know, most people think of it as a bully or something like that. But, you know, to use these terms appropriately, one needs to be prepared to define them. And then they need to be prepared to back up in some way that the person they're labeling with this term meets the definition that they've applied to the term, and back that up with evidence. Before someone is able to endorse violence against them, which I don't think is reasonable in any way, even if that's the case. Anyway, let's finish the comment. So is it the right who wants a right to act threatening against anyone not Snow White? Or is it Antifa wanting to strangle the idea of not hating anyone brown or black? Well, I don't think you're the instigator of violence if you want to strangle hate, because hate is just an emotional state, right? Hate doesn't mean anything. It's the actionable stuff that I think we need to be concerned with here. You're talking about thought control, and I don't think you can do it. I don't think it's possible. If you try to, it will just poke its head up somewhere else. It's like trying to squeeze a balloon and it starts popping up between the cracks in your fingers. You know, if you try to strangle hate, it's going to come out somewhere else, and it's going to be actually probably emboldened. It's going to be, see, we have reason to hate. It's the inverse of this thing that I was talking about in my response video to John the Other, is if you try to quash that without addressing it intellectually and calling people to defend their ideals, you're just going to make it stronger. It's like oxygen on a fire. Anyway, I better finish this comment. Okay. In the case of terrorism, it is clear that those icky Muslims are to blame, but what to do with those domestic terrorists committing those crimes based on nationalism? Clearly, biases, influences, viewpoints, warning good people is a child of psychotic nationalists defending the murder in Charlottesville, along with Trump calling on both sides having fine people. Well, I don't know. I'm not interested in defending Trump. I don't like the guy. I never did. So, I mean, I don't really care that much about that whole thing. But it seemed to me like he was trying to sort of negotiate through that mess and sort of trying to mediate somehow in a, you know, in a really misguided way. I don't think he was, I mean, what you're sort of saying there is that he was calling the murderer, which I think there's some questionable aspects of what happened with the car ramming the people anyway. And that, you know, this is the misconception again, is that the guy driving the car through the crowd was just like, I'm going to kill all these, I don't know what, kikes or something. I don't think that is reflective of the guys who were actually saying, gas the kikes, race war now. Like, those are the guys, if we're going to be talking about anybody, those are the guys we should be addressing, the guys actually espousing that hateful ideology. And to say that, you know, the overall, I mean, I'm sure there were good people on both sides at that rally. Was it 1%, 0.5%, 20%? I don't know. I wasn't there. But to sort of then just dismiss everybody as, okay, well, if you were in this area at that moment in time, we ought to just firebomb the place because you're all bad. I mean, there's more nuance than that. And it seems to me the left is the one always crying about nuance, but they seem to lose the nuance when it comes to some of this stuff. I'm a Dane whose dad was a young man during World War II, and I'll tell you that wanting brown, black, or queer people dead is a crime worth being punched for at every opportunity. Punch a Nazi at any opportunity you got. Well, even if that were the case, even if you were to say it's justifiable to punch anybody who wants brown, black, or queer people dead, the label has been expanded so far beyond that. And who are you? Who the hell are you to decide? See, what's happening here is you're deciding for people that they're in that class. You're deciding for people by labeling with Nazi or white supremacist or whatever. You're the one labeling them with the label, regardless of whether they have said, I want queer, brown, and black people dead. And that label has been expanded, I would argue, to far greater numbers of people than deserve to be having that label applied to them. This label is applied to people who do not want any of those people dead. And again, as I've said before, I don't think hate or racism is actually a crime. It's shitty. I don't condone it. But I don't think it's a crime. I believe we should all be treated as a minority of one. We should all be treated as individuals first and last. In other words, when you meet somebody, treat them well. If they treat you poorly, you might want to augment your treatment of them in response. If they treat you well, then you respond in kind. And you treat them as they deserve to be treated based on their specific personal actions. We can make generalizations about groups of people, of course, but those generalizations can't be applied to individuals. They have more to do with overall demographic shifts and different observations that we can make about people. I find it interesting, too, that, you know, we have this idea, like you say this, and that's interesting and all that, but I don't hear anybody complaining or saying that anybody ought to punch a feminist, a radical feminist, you know, people who openly say they want to kill all men or kill all white men. No, that's not said. Now, I'm sure that the argument is going to be something about, well, white men have institutional power. The fuck they do. Some do, sure. Some of the halls of power and all that are okay. But not the average. The average white man is broken by the time they're 60. Their bodies are broken from working too hard. They don't have any institutional power. Most of them are just trying hard to make ends meet and take care of their families. So kill all white men, I think, is equivalent to sort of what you're talking about here. And earlier when I said that I don't think there's any Nazis in 2018, obviously I was referring to people who are taking action on their hatred to round people up and exterminate them. And this is the problem with using the term Nazi in a lot of ways, is because we're misusing the term, misapplying the term, even to that degree. As I said before, I think it's a little bit insensitive to people who are actually, you know, had atrocities perpetrated on them by Nazis. I see I'm already approaching the 15-minute mark here, so I'm not sure if I'm going to upload this. We'll see. If I do, I think I'm going to have to make it a three-parter because I've got a little bit more to say on the topic of free speech and censorship and all of that with regards to these things. Thanks for hanging in there.